to a streaming service and a private news channel. Through this interview, you will reach the length and breadth of the country through all our News 18 channels, CNBC TV 18, CNN News 18, News 18 India, and digital properties, moneycontrol.com, First Post, and News18.com. Thank you so much for this. My first question, this is your fifth budget. You were navigating two epochal events in the last couple of years. One was the ongoing pandemic and its impact, and the other was the war in Ukraine. What I would like to understand from you is what was going on in the mind of Nirmala Sita Raman, and how she was dealing with policy making in these last 5 historic years.
Starting with a very difficult question, because difficult not for the reason, but to capture the experiences, the as I say, anubhav, going through that, and also to look back at it now when you're probably slightly out of it, is very difficult to describe in, let's say, a short brief answer.
I can understand.
But yet, if you have to really capture it, I had no precedent before me to handle such a situation. There were no given templates. There were no examples to follow. And there were no theories which would have worked in such context. So essentially, we were going by continuous conversation with all kinds of stakeholders. Those who have directly some thing to say about the industry and its suffering, MSME and its suffering, or even those who are observing it with a more discerning eye. So we had to engage in conversation continuously with all people, wait for ourselves to see which one is all right, which is more suitable for us and which is not.
Yes.
And also take courage in saying it may not work out for us in one particular way, because eventually somewhere all this has got to be answerable. And therefore I think I would immensely recall the ways in which Honorable PM led the conversation with us. He would never tire himself from meeting us. He would never say not today. So with all necessary precautions taken for COVID, following the protocol, we would still meet and talk about things. But eventually, whatever has been at that time decided and put out as schemes, one thing which was not so much relevant for dealing with the pandemic itself, but yet had to be done, was not to let go the opportunity to continue the reform process.
Yes.
So that was carried on. But we may do so many things. We may have a stable leadership, clear-headed leadership which stands by us and gives us the guidance under the minister. And we may come up with the proposals and also launch some specific schemes at that time to benefit, to give relief and so on. Eventually it is the way in which the people of India have absorbed it all. Actually absorbed it and found best ways to go around it with this kind of a succor which is coming from the government, or some hand holding which is coming from the government. May not be adequate, but so the credit goes to the people of India for having so been in clued position with the government's every decision making, and kept pace with it all. And that is why today we are where we are. Entirely the way in which people of India have absorbed whatever has been done from the government side and put it to effect in the ground.
Well, you make a very important point. I think you never gave up on reforms in the last so many years, despite come what may, pandemic, war in Ukraine, and that I must concede. I clearly remember that many experts and economists at that time panned the government, panned India, that we were not doing enough for stimulus, in the COVID period. And I remember they cited examples of Western economies, European economies, saying that, we should at least give 10 to 20% of GDP. That's the bare minimum we should do. Now, in hindsight, do you think that it was good to ignore that advice and, be tight-fisted, and that is showing up today?
Yes, that is why in answering earlier your question, we had to do our homework for every such input which came in at that time. Why? We could have always said, no, this is what appeals to us, and we would have gone ahead. No, but we had to consider every such advice which came in, and also go through the depths of what it would mean, how will it be executed, whether it can really bear the results, and so on. Only because whether we choose one way or not, we should know why we have not chosen a particular way, and be able to justify saying our understanding was this, and that's why we didn't take it. Today I have the advantage of looking back at it and say, good that I didn't take it, because the results would have been very different. But the fact remains that we went through every one of the suggestions with equal open-mindedness and
Nirmala ji, if I look at this budget, coming to this budget, the central theme, and you've elaborated, you've articulated it in your speech subsequently as well, but I would still like to ask this question, that there is a big push to capital expenditure on one hand, on the other you've also given a lot of money into the hands of the middle class and the rich, so that there is a consumption boom. All this while keeping the fiscal discipline in place, as you had promised, 5.9%, so that's giving some comfort to everyone. What I want to understand is, what are the few outcomes, big outcomes that you're looking at from this budget?
If well executed, if the states and the center work together, I expect tourism to really see a sea change. Flow of people coming in both from one other states and also from abroad. It should actually be a good way of keeping the economy active. If that is going to be this year and also medium term, I also see the momentum that PM Vikas scheme is coming up with. Because what it does, at least from the way in which I have done this work on understanding that scheme and to see how best it can be tailored, it touches that segment which is sort of self-employed, which has skills, which may be traditional skills, but which are very productively used, and that itself has a huge market, niche market of its own. If by launching PM Vikas, we will be able to touch upon a large section, not confined to any particular few castes which go by the description which Vishwakarma, but we are including everybody who uses his hand with some tools, produces things. That's a huge layer which doesn't get covered under A scheme or B scheme or C scheme. Now we are touching them. We are actually giving that material difference of receiving better attention, better raw material, better marketing, better professionalized way of aggregation and so on, with better fair rated credit from bank and so on. I think that layer which has remained unseen, untouched till now, but very recognized because of the quality of products that they produce, will now make a big difference to us. Equally, the push on green is not going to be any less. In every sector, there's been provisions made in the budget for them to do the transition from depending on fossil fuel to a renewable energy source-based fuel. And that will touch every walk of life, not just farmers, not just women in household, both from the point of view of user and also producer. You will generate enough power for yourself and be able to also sell it. And the final but most important, I would think, is the way we are going to shake up, also give life to the self-help women's groups which exists in the rural parts of the country. Some states have extraordinarily done well on SHGs in the last few decades. It's not as if they have been formed only today. A couple of decades they've been on the ground. 81 lakh of them, groups, exist. And it is they who we are now trying to aggregate, bring them together like clusters, see what they want to do in terms of production or services. For instance, I just bring in a very private sector example. Lijjat, the papad.
Lijjat papad.
Rahul was a women's somewhat self-help group. Look at the kind of product, the quality, the branding, the perception about what is Lijjat can always be superior in quality. There is never a compromise on it, and people seek it, even though from the general papad pricing it is slightly higher in price, but still people prefer it. So like that, SHGs, and I don't want just to end with papad making, it should be everything else also. So depending on the skill sets available, the raw material available, we want to make sure that SHGs do come in to benefit from government policy and also through digital marketing, run professionally as well.
That's interesting. You know, your budget was very well received by the markets. In fact, while you were speaking, the markets were really going up. But you know, the rout in the Adani stocks somewhat spoiled the party. You know, there is a general nervousness in the market. How does your government see this?
I look at the budget for having covered all the sections of the society. We've tried, and it has been a detailing that which has consumed a lot of time in preparation of this budget. The details is what has brought the difference in touching so many different sectors and segments of our society. We've got something on offer for each one of them. So therefore, if it's being received very well, I'm very glad. But of course, that motivates me to be able to now take it upon myself to better implement it down to the last person who's aimed at. So I would think the impact of the budget, the immediate impact of the budget on the market, and subsequent to, let's say, for whatever reason it trailed back, I think in the next few days the budget's impact will continue to hold the markets high.
You know, the opposition is taking aim at your government, saying that the banking and insurance companies have large exposure in Adani stocks. You know, and the investors and the broader market is looking to you for some direction on this issue. Is our banking and insurance system resilient to take this shock?
I want to recall the words, you know, coming from the horse's mouth has greater credibility. Both SBI and LIC have issued detailed statements, and I know the chairperson of the CE has himself come out and explained how they are not overexposed or whatever they said, and also said, look, we are sitting over profits for the exposure that we have, which is well within the limit. That's what I understand they have said, and I've again read it through the media. They have very clearly said that their exposure is very well within the permitted limits, and that they are, even now with the valuation falling as well, they are still sitting over profit. So if that is the horse's mouth, that's a word from the horse's mouth. But in general, both with the RBI, we do have the Financial Stability Board's meeting, which happens once in 6 months. We meet, even recently we have met. So I can only very clearly say, both the RBI and we, because of the FSB's meeting, Financial Stability Board's meeting, know that the Indian banking system, if anything, at this stage, for me to use this word, I want to use it with a sense of responsibility, like having gone through the twin balance sheet problem, Indian banking sector today at a comfortable level, with their NPAs coming down to absolutely low levels, recovery is happening, and their position is very sound, which gets reflected in the fact that when they go to raise monies in the market, they are absolutely comfortably raising monies as well. So the entire macroeconomic analysis which any expert would do also highlights the fact that how comfortable the Indian banks are placed in. That cannot be that if they are at risk.
Some of the global investors as well, you know, as a knee-jerk reaction, pulled out some money in the last couple of days. Some have put, fresh investments on hold. What would your message be to the global investors?
India remains as before a absolutely well-governed, stable government and also very well, regulated financial market. And as a result, I think the investor confidence which existed before shall continue even now. Our regulators are normally very, very stringent about certain governance practices, and therefore they should, one instance, however much talked about globally it may be, I think is not going to be indicative of how well Indian financial markets are governed. So many lessons have been learned over the decades, and therefore I think our regulators have kept our market well in prime and prim condition.
Thank you. That's very reassuring coming from the Finance Minister. Let me move on to the next question around the budget, and this is to do with the economy. The current, is the current recovery due to pent-up demand, or do you think that this will be sustained?
I think it will be sustained because the pent-up demand argument was very right nearly 5 quarters ago, when post the Omicron we were coming back. People thought 2022 festival season was driven by revenge shopping, yes, pent-up demand and so on. But that pent-up demand won't stretch itself for more than one season if you want to, take it that way. 2022 festival season was in its normal course and there was no exaggeration in the markets or even in consumption. So I think it has now reached a level where it will sustain itself.
No, I asked this question also because the rural demand is tepid. Looking at the commentary coming from FMCG companies in India. Also, if we look at, the work under the Manrega scheme and the, and FMCG results, I asked this question in this context as well. Can aggregate demand be more robust?
I'm sure you observe the Indian economy as well.
Yes.
In all its great detail. Demand doesn't remain stable and then it doesn't remain only going upward. It does come down sometimes and does go up some other times. In fact, at that time during the pandemic, even during the lockdown, most of us felt the rural demand is very high, and what could explain it? We thought that the farm outputs were very good, and as a result they were having quite a few money in their hand and therefore they were able to sustain it. So that happens soon after the harvest. But rural demand even today, in terms of the people who are in the farm equipment manufacturing areas, are quite comfortable with what is going on in the rural market. It's not as if demand has affected them. So people are placing equipments to do their tilling or farming activities. That's one. I'm not just talking about tractors, but even the other equipments which go in. One. And second, also rural demand, which is FMCG related or your daily consumption related items. Your GST revenues, whilst I don't want to say that revenue GST going up is purely on rural, it may be urban and rural, but it means that it cannot be maintaining a sustained level if one of the segments, rural or urban, really fall down drastically. So I don't think it's worrisome, if at all, any drop.
The RBI governor says that the worst of inflation is behind us. So can the RBI then take a more relaxed view of monitoring, tightening and support growth in the coming weeks and months?
Well, I realize that if I do comment, it will look as if I'm guiding the RBI or anything like that.
No, broadly speaking.
I suppose yes, the way in which inflation has come down, both by RBI's action and by the government's action, and the government's action has been steady and at it for some time. So I expect, since the fall in the inflation, it doesn't seem to be just a momentary or a 1 month affair, it should sustain itself in the process of coming down. And therefore they should, and you're right, therefore there shouldn't be that much pressure on the central bank to keep the pace of increasing the rates. But the MPC will take a call.
Of course. Any concern that you feel is there because of the twin deficit problems?
It's not as severe as before.
Yes.
Yes, when exports come down, you're going to have the current account deficit. But it's also now suddenly going up as well as it was before, a couple of months ago, one. And second is also the import. Imports also keep slightly going up sometimes, but it's also coming down. If these two factors are primarily the ones which we have to concern ourselves with, monthly fluctuations I say.
Yes.
Fluctuation should not worry us, but if every month there is a steady decline and there doesn't seem to be a sign of increase or coming upward, uptick as you would say, if there is no chance of an uptick predicted in the next few months, then I think I should worry. But monthly looking at coming down and going up need not worry us so seriously.
Okay. So next year the centre and states will spend rupees 13.7 lakh crore as capital expenditure. By any account, it's a phenomenal number. Capacity utilization in the manufacturing sector is at about 72%. My question is, when do you think that the private sector will enter this virtuous cycle of capital spending?
They are in it already, I would think.
There has been a minor uptick.
But I've been explaining this. I'm not sure if industry is explaining it as much, but I read it. So I keep read it in the sense my inferences based on the kind of discussions which happen. India's industry, the old India industry as well as the new, which is the IT related industry, software and so on, both old India industry and this, are transitioning also with the energy related matters, are transitioning also in the way in which their shop floors are operated. So the investment that they make is not to create one more unit of what they already have. The investment that they have to make, and therefore the conscious decision that they have to take, will now also look at not just expanding existing capacity the way it is, but also looking at bringing technology, Web3, robotics, 3D printing and so on. So that together with moving towards more renewable energy use, making a green product of what they are making. For instance, steel industry is facing huge barriers in Europe. Now, their business of having to invest and expand now would be not to just produce more steel, but to produce green steel. So the investment there has three new dimensions which have never been into consideration earlier. Invest and produce green, produce the efficiencies of technology. So all this, when comes into play, when your decision making is being done, does take time and more resources. So I would want to give that advantage for India's private sector, that yes, their process is going to be somewhat more complicated in terms of taking the decision, but I think the atmosphere is conducive for that on all grounds, technology, green and so on.
I'm kind of curious that while you've given a boost to capital expenditure and increased outlay to PM Awas Yojana, you've also cut the Manrega budget by 33% or 30,000 crore. Why have you done that?
Actually, the answer lies in your own question.
Okay.
PM Awas Yojana is also to be done by workers in the area, rural area, who normally would have gone for, let us say, in the absence of this, would have gone for Mahatma Gandhi Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme.
Right.
That's one answer, because even this has got to be done by people in the rural areas who are looking for jobs, just as Jal Jeevan Mission also goes through rural works. So they have these opportunities as well, which are coming, not in a small incremental change, 6% increase, 79,000 crores for PM Awas, and also Jal Jeevan also getting a huge allocation. So these two also are there along with me. Second, Manrega is a demand-driven scheme. The more people come saying we want the job, we give them the work. So what is stated at the budget time estimate tends to keep adding to its resources or based on what comes from states. I need more. Then we add more to it and go to the parliament with a supplementary demand. So if you see the last 3 to 4 years, inclusive of the COVID year, naturally, yes, the BE number and the RE numbers are so different in that the RE is much higher. And if you now go back to the last 2 years where the actual numbers are available, BE, RE and the actuals, you will see the actuals are lots more than the BE, and in some cases exactly as much as the RE, which is enhanced, or even better than the RE in increased amount when you realize it in the actuals. So you end up spending a lot more even as you're going on. So I'm a bit now worried that this is becoming a staid question. Manrega, you cut it. Just see the pattern for the last 3 years. It starts with a number at the BE, keeps going on because it's demand driven, and when the supplementary demand stage comes, it's actually a lot more.
Yes. So more opportunities have been created, so that's
right.
Yeah, so I agree. You know, the real average GDP growth rate is 6.5% as the economic survey says. With a little more reforms, the survey posits that it could even be a little higher at 7 to 8%. Now, what is the realistic and the desirable sort of growth rate for India if it were to become, you know, the third largest economy in the world by the end of this decade?
Desirable is one thing, but that desirable number will have to be tempered down by the global realities.
Yes.
The kind of uncertainties with every economy in the world faces. I don't think any one economy is so immune that the global volatilities don't affect them. So every economy is affected, particularly for a country like India, which for at least 2 critical items entirely depends on imports: fuel, fertilizer. So when you're looking at importing that many big ticket items, your uncertainties are lots more and lots more pronounced. But even provisioning for that and building a budget, we have definitely ensured that we will be not as much affected by such uncertainties as would any other country be. And therefore the numbers that we for the growth is very realistic.
Right. You know, one thing that struck me this time when I was listening to your budget speech was the absence of any mention of disinvestment or asset monetization. Why was that? You know, why has that at least seeming to take a backseat in the last year or so?
No, it is still there in the budget documents.
Right.
It may not have been a part of my speech, but it is in the appendix to the speech. It's also in the rest of the documents where we give the actual numbers and the activities which are going on and so on. See, the cabinet has after all taken a call that certain companies have to be privatized, and that motion has the approval of the authority concerned, which is the cabinet. So the process goes on. But of course, because we'll have to also see when is the best time for it to be done, given the fact that we've already done the homework and kept it ready for just going out to the market, this consumes a lot of time, this preparatory time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Post that is when we literally watch out for the market and then put it out. So both the factors, preparation and best time in the market, influence when you put it out. The process is on many of these items.
So you're saying it's a question of timing. The commitment to privatization remains as strong as
Absolutely,
ever.
Particularly on those where the cabinet has already given the go-ahead.
So last year you'd spoken about the privatization of 2 PSU banks. What happened to that? Have you identified the banks? Is the process on?
This is what is happening. The process is on. The amendments will have to happen in the Act.
Right.
and then also look at the market, and then it'll have to go through.
So it is very much on.
Of course it's on, because the cabinet has given the approval.
Right. So, Nirmala ji, the export sector is suffering because of slowdown in major markets. What are the options to mitigate the impact of weak international economies for us today?
See, it has two-sided problem. One, you have to make up for those handicaps that Indian exporters face, whether in logistics, whether it is the cost of electricity, or whether it is any other inherent handicap that they may have in terms of labor, or in terms of the place they are located in, and so on. So for these inefficiencies because of certain handicaps, it is necessary to give some kind of a redressal, in the sense give them some incentive, or the RODTEP-like scheme which is already on. So that's one thing. But it's also the usual way in which you would say, if a market is difficult, look for newer markets. If a market is difficult, see what you want to do about making yourself attractive for that market. You do road shows, or you spend money in branding yourself, or you appoint such agents who will tell us about the tastes in that and preferences in that market, and so on. And looking for another market, you will obviously spend some money and go on road shows, open up avenues there. But today, the typical problem that you face, not just you, meaning Indian exporters, but many face, is the lack of demand in those markets because of recession, which are normally our marketplaces where we send our products, whether it's your textile, whether it is your diamonds, whether it's your gems and jewelry, whether it is your tea, whether it's your basmati rice, and so on. So I'm taking those which are symbolic of India. There are others, components, auto components, electronic parts, which you very well manufacture today. So when the recession has hit these economies, and when I say these economies, not just those in which you're present, but even for the newer markets which you might otherwise aim at, all of them are hit by it. So that's where the problem gets even more compounded, and we'll have to work together with the exporters to see how best we can help it.
Okay. India's trade deficit with China has hit 100 billion in 2022, $100 billion in 2022. Imports keep rising, exports to China are falling. Is this situation acceptable to us? How do we really reverse this trend?
No country would want its exports to languish and imports to balloon with any trading partner. But the issue has two-pronged answers. We should be conscious not to have to consume things which come, overly from only one destination. But that doesn't mean I'm imposing any view. We should also be conscious of buying it from elsewhere if it is necessary at all. And for India's exports, it has to also look at ways in which market can be expanded in that territory or in any other geographical jurisdiction. So it is always a twin game. It's like a pair of scissors. You have to look at both the sides.
What do you make of this growing clamor, especially in some opposition ruled states like Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, to bring back the old pension scheme? In fact, Deputy Chief Minister of Maharashtra, Devendra Fadnavis ji, has also spoken about this. He said he'll look into the matter. What is the government's view on this?
See, when I talk about government's view, I want to speak as though this government view or that government's view. Who, after all, implemented it for the first time? After the decisions were taken at different layers of officialdom, the political dispensations which brought this in was not just NDA. UPA was actively those who brought it forward. The entire question of introduction of OPS, new pension scheme, was during the Congress's period. didn't at that time talk about rollback. They didn't at that time talk about any, bringing the old system back or anything of that. So now, if without adequate looking into of what it means, are we paying the current generation of pensioners by loading it onto the future generation?
That's right.
And how far, because in government the arguments will quickly come back to you saying, but when government borrows, it's also leaving a burden on the future generation and so on. But that's the argument. Would we all look at what is a reasonable balance? Would we look at what is it that we are leaving for our generations to come? Yes, you will have to have an economy running, you will borrow to a certain extent. But unless we have a complete understanding of this, the fiscal implication, the fiscal health of the state, not just today, for the next decades, to rush to a conclusion may not be.
Right.
And I was glad to hear in one of the book programs that I attended, Sri Montek Singh Aluwalia talk about it. It's not I'm taking up something which emerged out of a private conversation.
Right.
In a book release publicly, when asked, he did respond. So it's not as if now we are talking on political lines. We have to talk on Indian economy, its strength, not just Indian economy as Government of India, but every state's economy, and then take a call on it.
That's right. Let's move on to the personal tax front. I think it is one thing that has really wowed everyone, wowed the middle class, your core vote bank also of the BJP. You want obviously people to move to the new tax regime. So by when will you then look at phasing out 80C and 80D deductions? Because that's really the core of investments, healthcare. When will this happen? What is your time frame to sort of move to the new tax regime entirely?
No, I'm not given myself a time frame. I'm more looking at it to make sure every Indian citizen makes his own choice, her choice. It's one thing for me to say I'm bringing in a better system, which is going to be less complicated, in fact, least complicated, which also is going to give you a rate which is going to be reasonable for each one of our levels of income, and make it attractive therefore for compliance and also for the rate. I pay less tax there. But it's another thing to have a system which is going on, where unfortunately I don't want to criticize anybody. Unfortunately, the impression is I have so many exemptions given, which incentivizes me to save for insurance cover, for medical cover, for even saving for better interest earning that I can have, and so on. I don't want people there to think that I've denied them that. Please if you want to have it that way. But it's not just one government or the other. In general, the philosophy that governed it was you'll have all those exemptions and you'll feel tempted to have yourself cover, insurance cover, give yourself insurance cover or savings or whatever. But your tax rates were so high.
Yes.
So it's nice to give you some incentives, but good enough for me to have a big return in terms of the tax that I collect. But where is what I'm giving you now, which was introduced 2 years ago, this the second regime, and Prime Minister was very clear that taxpayers should know actually what they're paying and exactly feel comforted that they're not paying much, and actually bring in rates down, make it simple so that anyone sitting at home should be able to file their returns and know, and that's the end of the story. I don't need to keep immense documents and so on. We brought that in, and steadily we are making it attractive, but not forcing anybody to get out of the exemption regime. But the fact remains there that the rates have been very high and you've still got some discounts so that you can go with your...
So how many people do you think will migrate? Any sense that the government has?
I'm more talking about the layers which are covered
Yes.
by these, beneficial tax rates. I would think in that layer at least 50% will come over.
50%. That's a big number. And what is the current number? Any idea that the government has of that?
Yeah, I have a number, but I don't think I can off the cuff say it.
Okay. This is a slightly broader question. You've been extremely successful in widening the tax base. As the base has widened, the tax slabs tend to go down. Do you think that could you consider in the long run bringing the top tax slab to 25%, just in line with your corporate tax rate, top corporate tax rate? Would that be the vision going forward?
Well, eventually the tax rates must be absolutely low and the assessee friendly. Citizens cannot be burdened with taxation. But that is when I have widened my base sufficiently. It can't be that few people pay huge amounts and I have to run the system. It shouldn't be that. It should definitely be wider the base, lower the tax, and therefore achieve both the objectives of collect your tax from those who can pay it, but collect enough so that you are able to run your schemes.
The new income tax regime, there is a feeling that it disincentivizes savings. How do you react to that?
I gave you the logic.
Yeah.
I can always incentivize you, go for insurance, go for savings, go for this, and come up with a fantastically high rate. Say, all right, I've given you discounts, but I need my money. Instead, I'd prefer a completely acceptable and lower rate of interest, lower tax rate, and people to feel that, all right, I'm not being burdened, there's no reason for me to avoid or evade the tax and pay it up.
And you have the choice of deciding your own saving instrument, right? You're not...
I was going to say, I'm on the side, or I belong to that school of thought which says, if the taxpayer is left with more money in his hand because we collect less tax, I would think that he's the best judge to decide where he has to put his money, and he doesn't need an incentive to run his family or to protect them from ill health or to not bother about his future, save for future and so on. So why do we want to underestimate our citizens? If I give very high tax rate, then I also have to tempt them to say, all right, go about saving it because I'm giving you some incentive here. But I've left more money because I tax you less. You are the best judge to do what you want with your money.
Some of the experts feel that it was a rather bold move for you to reduce the rich tax from 42% to 39% in what is an election year. But is it that you've given some and taken away from the other hand as well, and so it's a zero-sum game in a sense?
Where have I taken away?
The real estate, earlier you could move money to real estate, now the cap is 10 crore, beyond 10 crore there is no... There are a couple of...
That's not taking away. It is like saying, beyond 10 crore of a house that you have, why do you want to also expect favors for a second or the third or the fourth?
Correct.
And there have been instances, I might say, without revealing any names or any kind of... People who have bought house, sold house, made immense profit out of it, but who still enjoy these sort of, 10 crore house, I should still get my benefits from the government.
So the bold move in an election year.
But I'm not give and take there. Okay. I've not given away something and taken away something. I'm only giving.
Okay.
I've not taken away anything.
So that's as I said, a bold move in an election year, because people don't expect you to do it.
No, but if you're referring to the surcharge which I brought down and which therefore is going to give benefit to some of the upper middle class and high net worth individuals,
that's right.
It's also because the Indian tax system should be seen for not being so harsh. With your 30% surcharge, you were reaching a total tax of 42.75 or something.
42.7%, yeah.
42% of tax taken away. Even a person who is that, talented enough, skilled enough, and is paid very well for his contribution to the firm and has a good earning.
Yes.
Take away nearly 42.7. Doesn't make our system look fair.
Right.
And therefore we brought it down.
MNCs are looking at a China plus one strategy. So you've spoken about it in your budget speech. We've seen that the manufacturing and export of mobile phones from India has really gone up. Which are the other sectors in manufacturing that could benefit out of this China plus one?
Well, the PLI that we've given out with
Yes.
13 sectors is definitely a China plus one list, which is sunrise sectors, which are important sectors for India to have its own strength. That's exactly the China plus one kind of a.
Okay. There is a funding winter in the startup ecosystem. In fact, some of the startups that were doing really well off their valuation highs. What is the government specifically planning to do about this? This government has done a lot for the startup community in the last few years. So what next? What would you do?
I think the funding is also waiting to see more innovative startups claim for the next stage. It's not as if it's a funding winter, or it's not now a scarcity of funds. It's more funds seeing the opportunity that is available for them, and they want to look at better options also, even among the startups.
Right.
And India, which started in 2016, major push. I'm sure startups existed before, but the push happened with the Honorable Prime Minister in 2016 announcing a policy and subsequently coming up year after year some concession. So they also go through a cycle, one round done, the next round of good options. They are there, they will, I'm sure, be available.
Nirmala ji, you will be meeting the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors later this month in Bangalore. What is your message to them, and what are your main agenda items that you will take up and highlight?
The agenda, of course, is by now fairly well determined. We will be talking about the debt situation globally, because many countries which were even middle income countries have suddenly got into debt traps, and those traps are really vicious traps. They are not able to come out of it. Now, during the pandemic, debt servicing, there was a scheme which the IMF and also looking at the G20 formulation, there was a plan which had come, debt servicing, and many of these countries didn't have to service their borrowing for a certain period because of the pandemic, and there was a call for extending it. It was extended. But we are also making sure that enough monies are available with these institutions, multilateral institutions, so that they are able to better respond to situation, have better leverage over the funds that they already have with them. So these are matters of discussion: debt servicing, also debt financing, multilateral finance institutions and their reforms, about which Honorable PM has spoken several times: UN reform, IMF reform, WTO reform, World Bank reform, and so on. So we'll be discussing many of these. Also at a global kind of a SOP to be available, to be agreed upon for regulating crypto assets,
Right.
whilst recognizing the central bank as the authority for issuing cryptocurrency. The rest of the assets which are being created outside, which are using very useful financial technologies, even those will have to be discussed, because regulation cannot be done by any one country singularly. It has to be a collective action, because technology doesn't brook any borders.
Okay. Nirmala ji, you have to answer this question, specific question. You've presented 5 budgets so far. Which has been the most memorable budget?
Very difficult to say. Each one had its own challenge, but each one has its own charm.
Okay. Now, one last question. After months of hard work, you managed to put this whole thing together. How does Nirmala Sita Raman unwind? What do you do? Do you ever take a break? What do you do to unwind?
Well, listen to a lot of music.
What music do you listen to?
Classical Indian music, both Hindustani and Carnatic. I sleep well every day.
I think we should
I
be in a
have
happy
sleep routine.
we should be in a happy place that the finance minister of the country sleeps well.
Absolutely, because we have a good Prime Minister who's got that kind of a vision, and the strength of the leadership that he brings along helps the country. So,
yes, that too.
Good sleep.
Thank you, Nirmala ji, for your time. Thank you for the first interview to a private channel and a streaming service. And more importantly, congratulations on a very well delivered budget. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for giving me this opportunity.